friends, and welcome back to another episode of Care Team Chronicles. My name is Ingrid, and I'll be your host. Joining me today is our special guest, Alex Boucher, founding attorney of Boucher Law. Welcome, Alex, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ingrid. I appreciate it.
Yes, and we are so lucky to have you today. You have a great deal of experience and knowledge on nationwide regulation of marijuana, hemp, and cannabinoids, and are at the forefront of the evolving cannabis legal field. So we hope you can shed some light on some of these questions that we have.
Of course, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Yeah, my name is Alex Boucher. I'm the founder of Boucher Law. I started Boucher Law in November of 2018, 1 month before hemp legalized federally. I saw the opportunity. I saw that the Hemp Farming Act of 2018 was going to be included in the Farm Bill, and I decided that it was a big area of law with a lot of opportunity that was underserved at that time. So jumped into the industry head first. I really focus on hemp businesses as well as medical marijuana patient advocacy. I really focus my practice on making sure that hemp businesses are compliant with state and federal law, and that medical patients are know the law, know their rights, and are using medicine as safely as possible. So that's really my goal.
And we thank you for doing that. We really need advocates out here. And we have so many questions for you, and we know you can shed some light on all of the confusion that's out there. And one of the biggest questions we get is CBD legal?
So that's an interesting question, and I would love to say yes, CBD is legal, or no, CBD is illegal. But the honest answer is it depends. It depends on what you put it in. It depends on the source plant. So we'll start off with the Farm Bill legalized hemp, which is cannabis that's below 0.3% Delta-9 THC. And because it's a decarboxylation standard, that includes THCA. So there's a formula to add your THC and your THCA together. And if it's below 0.3%, then it's deemed hemp. So CBD from hemp is legal in and of itself. However, it's not a controlled substance. It was descheduled along with hemp because the source plant is hemp, and it was never itself scheduled as a singular cannabinoid. So CBD itself as a molecule is legal. What's not legal federally is putting that molecule, the CBD molecule, into dietary supplement products or marketing it in food products. So dietary supplement products, which you see all the time with CBD in them, are actually illegal at the federal level because there's been no submission to the FDA about a new dietary ingredient covering CBD, and the FDA has not accepted that submission. So anybody labeling as a dietary supplement is in violation of federal law. The reason it's not being enforced is because the FDA is currently trying to regulate CBD. So what they're doing is they're sending out letters. They're not really sending out people to raid or seize products, though that could happen in the future. But on the other hand, in cosmetic products, CBD is legal because in cosmetics, it's regulated a little bit differently. You just can't put anything that's unsafe in cosmetics. And so far, the FDA hasn't deemed CBD to be unsafe in cosmetics. So that's why you see your CBD cosmetics, your CBD topicals, bath bombs at places like GNC, Kroger, even I think Walmart has started even getting into the game in a little bit of a degree. So it really depends, but your tinctures are clearly illegal at the federal level. Then you look at the state law, and each state, the federal farm bill allowed each state to regulate hemp. So at the state level, you then have to see, well, have they recriminalized CBD, or have they first exempted hemp from their Controlled Substances Act? And most have, except for Idaho and a few other states. Then in their regulations, have they allowed it in food, or are they going along with the federal government? And a good example here would be Colorado and California. So Colorado allows allows CBD and hemp-derived ingredients explicitly in food products. We passed a bill that says all hemp-derived ingredients are allowed in food in Colorado. California, on the other hand, said, their Department of Health said, no CBD in food or dietary supplements because it violates federal law. Maine, I believe, has a hemp foods bill. So you're starting to see a real dichotomy of states, some following federal law and others following, others passing laws to allow CBD in food and not dietary supplements, but food currently, because dietary supplements, like I said, is a body of federal law. And if you put CBD in a dietary supplement, there's no argument that you haven't broken federal law.
Wow, that's pretty big.
Okay. And then the other side is, so that's CBD from hemp. The other side is CBD from marijuana. So if we all know, marijuana plants can also have high concentrations of CBD along with a THC percentage over that 0.3%. And that CBD has to be sold at the state regulated level in dispensaries. So if you buy, from those CBD from those dispensaries, then you're legal under state law, but you're still breaking federal law. So, both sides of the issue, it's a complicated question on whether CBD is legal right now. The molecule itself, absolutely, but the use of it is where businesses and people can run into trouble.
Wow. And I know a lot of people can buy CBD online. I think we talked a little bit about that. Why is that?
So companies have decided to put their CBD products online, and in a lot of states, it's legal to buy CBD in food products, like Colorado and a few other states that passed hemp food laws. Other states who haven't outright banned it, they're in a gray area where it's legal, but it still breaks federal law, but they haven't essentially made a decision whether they're going to allow it at the state level or defer to the feds and essentially keep it illegal and potentially take it off the shelves. But businesses decided essentially to put their products up online and put disclaimers in their terms of use and privacy policy that say, it is up to you to know the laws of your state. And if you purchase this product, only purchase this if you're in a lawful state. So if you are in a lawful state and you purchase a product and it complies, the labeling's correct and it complies with state and federal law, the likeliness of you having an issue if you're over 18 is very little, especially if you're not subject to drug testing. And that's a whole nother issue that I think we're going to dive into is drug testing and CBD with minors, which is really important. But essentially, businesses are putting these products up online, and it's up to you to know the laws of your state if you're going to purchase them. And that's the position they've taken. Because we have 50 states and because the federal government legalized hemp in a way to allow all 50 states to regulate, we're going to have patchwork regulation. Every state is going to be different, and it's going to require a lot of legal insight in order to operate in a nationwide hemp industry business. And a lot of companies right now don't want to put forward that much money into the research, so they're just saying it's all on you to follow the law.
Wow. So it's a consumer's responsibility.
Correct.
And like you mentioned, what are the risks of giving a minor CBD, and does it matter if it's a medical marijuana patient?
So it is a complicated question. So there's always a risk of giving a child CBD, not just because there's a health risk, which is pretty minimal, we've seen from studies, but because if that child were to say, hey, I took this hemp medication or hemp tincture at school, or got sick and went into the hospital, and one of the things that they do in the ER is essentially one of the first things they do is do a drug panel. And that child who's under 18 comes back hot for THC, because CBD products and hemp products, most of them are still not tea-free, and even the ones that are tea-free, there's a question on whether CBD actually activates that THC test in some cases. So if they came back hot, or there was a mandatory reporter to the health department of the state, that starts a child services investigation. And there have been children who have been removed from homes because they've been given CBD. So be very careful ordering online or buying CBD and giving it to your kid, from a gas station. Essentially, if it's hemp-derived CBD, you're taking a very big risk, potentially losing your child if they were to talk to a mandatory reporter who then says, who then reports to the state, or if they were to get drug tested because they went into the ER for, a condition that needed immediate attention. So that's the hemp side of things. The marijuana side of things is a little bit different. And I'll really speak to Colorado because it's the medical system I know best. But in Colorado, if you can have two doctors prescribe a minor recommend marijuana for a minor. It's not prescribed, it's recommended. And then at that point, the parent, they can register as a caregiver, and the parent can then go purchase both CBD and THC products from licensed dispensaries. In that case, the state knows that doctors have recommended CBD to your child. And in that case, the likeliness of, a CPS, Child Protective Services investigation, could be opened if it was a mandatory reporter issue, or if it was an issue where there was a drug panel at the hospital and they tested positive for THC. But the likeliness of them being successful in enforcing that is very small, because you're following the law. You've been recommended, your child has been recommended marijuana from a doctor. You've registered with the state, and there's laws in place in Colorado to give you defenses to any sort of enforcement action that would follow. So if you're trying to get, if your child needs CBD, it's a lot safer to get it through the medical system than it is just going out and ordering it online. It's a lot better because it's safer legally. You have a lot less chance of having your child taken. And the other thing is, CBD on the medical side is tested, at least in Colorado, to a much higher degree than hemp. Hemp is on the hemp side. So with medical marijuana testing and recreational marijuana testing, but I'll keep it to medical right now, they have to test for heavy metals. They have to test for residual solvents, pesticides, potency, and then I think mycotoxins. Whereas on the hemp side, none of that has to be tested for. So you can have high levels of mold or potentially lead, depending on the extraction process and how clean the entire process is on the hemp side. Whereas on the medical side, you actually know that these products have been tested. So they're, I'm not going to say safer, but they've been tested. So the likeliness that they contain impurities is a lot less than on the hemp side. So there's two reasons why, if you have a minor, it's really the way to go is to get a medical marijuana card, because it provides you defenses in case of enforcement, and the products you're getting are tested.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we do have a lot of clients that want to pursue the hemp therapy, but what are the risks if you decide to not follow your medical advice and start with a cannabinoid-based treatment or therapy instead of going directly with what your doctor suggests?
So this depends. Yeah, and this depends kind of state by state, because some states give doctors more weight than others. But in many states, if you are in a hospital and you go act against your doctor's advice, your doctor can initiate a proceeding to try to override your decision-making in the best interest of the child. So there's always a risk that if you don't follow your doctor's advice to, start them on a therapy, or continue them on a therapy, or not use cannabis, there's always an advice, or there's always a chance that that doctor could report you to the state and try to initiate some sort of social services proceeding. So it really is a state by state issue. And this is one where if somebody is having that issue, they should reach out to me directly. So I can either help them out myself or connect them to somebody that can help them within the state they're in.
Got it. Thank you. And most states, do they have a medical CBD program, or is that an option?
So most states have medical, well, not most states, the states that have medical marijuana, that's essentially a medical CBD program. There is an argument that if you had a medical marijuana card, it could cover you for using hemp-derived cannabinoids. So if you purchased a hemp-derived CBD to use, as long as your kid had a medical card, because it's cannabis, there's still an argument that that would be, that you'd be in a better position with, if rather than your kid not having a medical card. Yeah, so it's an interesting issue. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm going to say on that.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting, and especially on the state level. And as we are moving forward, we're noticing that a lot of states are are getting ready to decriminalize marijuana. Is expunging convictions something that happens automatic? Does it differ state to state? And what are the difference between decriminalization and legalization and regulation?
So I'll start with just the differences between decriminalization and legalization and regulation. So what we see in states that decriminalize is a lot of times we see arrests go up. They decriminalize and they say essentially possession is legal, but you still can't sell it, manufacture it, turn it into products. So then what happens is a lot of the local prosecutors start charging a lot of possession offenses as intent to sell. And we all know that poor and poorer communities of color are infringed against or are enforced against much more so than rich white communities. So decriminalization isn't necessarily the victory that everybody is hoping for, because the police still have the power essentially to charge most possession cases as intent to distribute, and we do see that. And even in cases where they're not successful, just putting somebody in jail and making them post bail, a lot of times people can't post bail and then they end up just being stuck in the prison system. So it's a real criminal justice issue right now. The difference with regulation and legalization is then it's explicitly allowed what you're doing. So you can, like in Colorado, as a recreational user, you can purchase up to 1 ounce of marijuana. In Colorado, as a medical marijuana user, you can purchase up to 2 ounces of marijuana unless you have an extended plant count or an extended ounce count. So regulation explicitly allows the activity so that the police can't then, and it allows the manufacturing, it allows sales, so that the police can't say, oh, you aren't possessing, you're just trying to sell. Like I said, legalization and regulation is really key. But even then, you can't go overboard. So what we're seeing in California is they have so much testing and regulation, their ounce prices are over $300 an ounce in a lot of cases. In Colorado, our ounce prices are somewhere between 100 and 150 usually, and sometimes you can get it less for that, a lot less than that. And in California, you're still seeing a major black market because the black market can compete with those high prices. Whereas in Colorado, you're seeing a black market exporting the states that are still legal, but you don't see a lot of black market internally because the prices are so low. So when you regulate, you have to regulate to make sure that you're not regulating it so it's so expensive that it's still cheaper to go to the black market, because people will go to the black market. You have to make sure that you regulate it to regulate the black market out, to make sure that it's safe. People are getting only what they need, and there aren't additives or harmful additives or mycotoxins or heavy metals included. And besides that, it needs to kind of be a free market economy. Obviously, you need protections and child-proofing containers, are a big step. I think there's a lot of waste in the industry that needs to be taken care of. But yes, it's quite an interesting issue in terms of the difference between decriminalization and regulation and legalization, just because decriminalization really doesn't get you very far. It's a start, but you really need legalization and regulation to stop the arrests. The second part of your question was about expungement of criminal records. No state, to my knowledge, has made that automatic. Colorado did just pass an amendment to a bill that allows Governor Polis to mass pardon marijuana convictions at his discretion. But to my knowledge, no law so far has been automatic expungement. The city of Denver was one of the first to allow expungement programs, and there's a fee. They've tried to make it minimal, but it does take time, and you potentially need a lawyer to get your case sealed. So I really hope that as states move towards better regulation and towards legalization, they really think about the social equity and social justice part of this. And at the same time, as legalize the industry, also recognize that it was made illegal for political reasons in the first place and expunge those convictions.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really detailed, and that just brings the point that we're trying to get regulation and legalization, not just decriminalization. With the rights of consumers of cannabis and workers in the cannabis industry, what are the rights that they have when it comes to getting rentals or being denied home loans?
So unfortunately, even this is actually cannabis industry wide, including the hemp industry. the SBA and FinCEN have put out guidance saying that, that FinCEN, which is the Financial Enforcement Center, they have put out guidance that hemp businesses should be banked as any other business as long as they're following federal law. When the SBA came out and did PPP, they said that hemp businesses themselves pretty much had to prove that they were complying with federal law to be eligible. So what's going on is banks don't like risk, and banks essentially are sitting back and saying, I know we're getting guidance saying hemp is legal and we can take this business, but it seems a little gray, and we still are worried about marijuana because clearly the federal government, it's still a Schedule I substance. It's still clearly not allowed to be banked. Safe banking has not passed. It's passed the House, but has not passed the Senate, nor has it been signed. So banks are making a risk decision just not to loan to people working in the industry or having significant interest in the industry. There are some banks out there that will, and they charge pretty hefty fees to do so, excessive interest, or excessive origination fees, but they're taking on a risk, and they're essentially making the borrower pay for that risk. So both on the cannabis, or both on the marijuana and the hemp side, less on the hemp side now, but it's still an issue. It's difficult to get a bank to give you a mortgage or give, especially a business loan. Like typical business financing is still wholly unavailable for the marijuana side, and mostly unavailable for the hemp side. Certain banks have started jumping into deposit accounts and providing a lot, high interest loans, but the typical lines of credit at the major banks are still unavailable really for most of the cannabis industry. So until we see a change at the federal level, banks have the right to deny mortgages based on pretty much anything except for religion, race, and other protected classes. But besides that, I mean, if you're saying I'm in a federally illegal business, they have the right to not loan to you. Rentals is kind of the same way. Rentals, they're a private business. They can put whatever they want in their lease agreements as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights and discriminate against protected classes. Besides that, they're pretty free to do what they want. So they can say you can't smoke marijuana, you can't consume marijuana. We don't want people who work in the industry because there's a risk that they will consume or bring marijuana onto the premises. I mean, and it's an issue. The one question, and this really has not been tested yet, is medical marijuana patients using cannabis as medicine in apartments, and whether there's a claim that under the Americans with Disabilities Act that's discrimination based on a medical condition. And that hasn't been tested, but there is a potential that a case like that could set precedent that would allow at least medical patients, and probably in certain states, it'd be likely a state level decision that would allow them to consume, probably not smoke because of clean indoor act violations, but at least allow some consumption of therapeutic medicine if the state recognizes it as such. But again, that's not been tested. I'm not saying that anybody should go out and test that because it's really a 50-50 toss up on who your judge is in terms of the decision.
Wow. So if somebody did have a medical marijuana card, they may want to talk to like a lawyer before testing it out.
Yeah. I mean, or you don't necessarily need to talk to a lawyer, but just be careful and know that if you violate your lease, you could be on the hook for a lot of money. If you're in a legal state, it's likely not going to result in a crime if you're using the amount that you're allowed to have and use, but you could definitely be on the hook for lease break. They could charge you damages because you smoked in the apartment. If it goes to court, a lot of times leases have an attorney's fees provision, so you could end up having to pay their attorney's fees. So it could get really expensive. So just be aware that if you're breaking the terms of your lease, it could have expensive repercussions on the back end.
Good to know. And professionals like nurses, doctors, lawyers, physicians in an illegal state, can they use cannabis? I know some of them get tested, like nurses. Is that, would they still be protected if they do have a medical card?
So it's really a gray area. In most states, and I'll speak directly to Colorado right now, but in most states, especially Colorado, there are qualifications on licenses saying that you can't use or excessively use controlled substances, or habitually use controlled substances. And in Colorado, marijuana is still defined as a controlled substance. It's unscheduled, but it's still defined as a controlled substance. Which is an interesting backdoor that was put in, I think, right after we legalized around 2014. So in Colorado, if you're a medical patient, let's say you're an electrician, a plumber, a nurse, and you habitually use marijuana, which is a controlled substance, you could lose your license because part of your license says that you cannot habitually use controlled substances, even though you have a medical card. I do not know of licenses that have been pulled from medical patients to this point. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. It's just those cases stay fairly quiet when they do. But it's a serious risk. And until Colorado and other states remove marijuana from the controlled substances lists, professionals could lose their license for using medical marijuana if they use it every day, or, it says excessive or habitual. So that really comes down to whoever's deciding the case's interpretation of what is habitual. Is that once a week? Is that, is that every day? Is that once a month? I mean, it's such a gray area, nobody knows. But the real key is getting marijuana completely removed from the controlled substances, both federally and in states. Alcohol is not a controlled substance. We said regulate marijuana like alcohol in this state in our Amendment 64, and currently it's not regulated anything like alcohol. Controlled substances are for prescription medications and for substances that are legal. And right now, marijuana is not prescribed. It's recommended. It's also freely available to those using it recreationally in the amounts under 1 ounce. And it's not an illegal substance under state law. So it doesn't really belong on the controlled substances list. And this is one of the reasons why giving your child CBD is so dangerous and potentially so fraught with legal consequences, is because marijuana is still a controlled substance. And if you test positive for THC, the assumption is it's marijuana and that you gave your child marijuana. And you can provide defenses to that, but if they don't have a medical card, you don't really don't have a defense. So it's really important to do your research, know your state laws. If you can get a medical card for your child under 18, do so. But at the same time, know that even though those registries are confidential, a lot of times the state does not respect the confidentiality of the registries. So that's another issue, is if you sign your kid up for a medical card, does it stay confidential, or does that potentially get exposed, and then that information could follow them down the line? So I'm just trying to be honest. I've seen breaches of confidentiality of registry systems in multiple cases. So really trying to provide the full picture for people to make an informed decision.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate that. We need that transparency here. We have a lot of clients that do have medical cards and may want to travel or want to purchase products in different states with medical dispensaries. Is that allowed? Are you able to do that? I mean, it seems like there's not a lot of big protection when it comes to having a medical card.
Right. And at the federal level, there's very little protection. There's a Rohr-Farbacher Amendment, which is now renamed, but essentially says the Department of Justice can't enforce any federal laws or prosecute any federal laws for people complying with state medical marijuana laws. So that does provide protection for patients, but that doesn't allow patients to take cannabis across state lines, for example, because that's a federal crime, and that is not protected. No state has legalized allowing you to take marijuana across state lines. So you'd be in violation of state law, then you'd be in violation of federal law, and because of that amendment wouldn't apply and they could prosecute you. If you go to a state like New Mexico, I believe there was a court decision in New Mexico that just overturned one of their Department of Health decisions to essentially remove reciprocity. I do believe that New Mexico has reciprocity now. Washington, D.C. has reciprocity, so they'll take essentially any card from any lawful state. There is an issue here too, though, because the registries are confidential. It's almost impossible for out-of-state dispensaries to verify, or for dispensaries to verify out-of-state cards. There's no way for them to call up, another state and say, hey, is this person on the registry? So at that point, it's kind of, an honor system and gray. And until we have a database where people can look up whether these cards are legit or whether they're, forged, falsified, there's going to be pushback against reciprocity. So I'm all for reciprocity. I think reciprocity is really important, especially with federal illegality still looming. But I understand why there's some pushback, because they're worried about fraudulent medical cards coming into these states where there's no ability to verify them.
Yeah. I have helped a lot of clients where they have a medical marijuana program, but no dispensaries. And then they're wondering, how do I get my product? And there's only a few of those states that offer that option. So it does get tricky. Do you know why it takes so long for them they have a program, but the dispensaries aren't open?
So usually, it even took, so we legalized, I think we legalized in Colorado in 2000, and it took until about 2008 for the dispensary regulations to really be formed. So that was 8 years. So a lot of these, there was still in the beginning of the industry, it wasn't these massive dispensaries, products, corporate. It was really caregivers and patients, and patient would go to a caregiver and they'd cultivate for X number of patients, and then you'd purchase or you wouldn't purchase, but you would essentially get your marijuana from your caregiver. But these other states that are setting up, they're actually doing it fairly quickly. It does take a couple of years, because first you have to have either the amendment pass or a bill pass the state house. Then that bill usually doesn't enact for a certain period of time, a couple months sometimes. After it enacts, then you have rulemaking. So the rulemaking is really what flushes down, how much you're allowed to have, where you're allowed to have it, security protocols, how much you're allowed to grow, with the licensing costs, the licensing process. So then they have to do all the rulemaking, which takes usually 3 to 4 months. Then they open up the applications, and then people start applying using that application, and then they have to run through that whole process. And usually there's hiccups and they need to redo the application to some degree. And so it's a long bureaucratic process, and it's really frustrating. But we saw Oklahoma set up one of, probably the best medical marijuana systems in the whole country very quickly. Oklahoma is essentially a free market medical marijuana state, because they haven't put limits on licenses. They also are very protective of medical patients' rights. So Oklahoma is a really good example of a conservative state that went medical and went straight headfirst into the deep end. So I actually think that Oklahoma's done a great job with how they've regulated, and I would like other states to follow Oklahoma. Colorado's done a great job regulating. I think we have some over-regulation to some degree, but yeah, it takes some time, but I think things are moving faster now than they have before.
I do see that. When these states where cannabis is legal medically and recreationally, what happens when you get a cannabis DUI? Do you have to agree to take a blood draw? Do you have to agree to do a search, or what are your rights?
So this is very specific to Colorado. Because I'm a Colorado attorney, I'm just going to stay with Colorado law. Colorado is an interesting state where if you refuse a blood test or an impairment test of any kind, your license is suspended automatically roadside for 2 years. So in that case, it's better to take the blood draw. They'll take you to a hospital and then fight it out in court and say, hey, I'm a medical marijuana patient. I've been recommended this amount. My blood levels always have this amount in them. And then if you have that medical marijuana card, it's a pretty good defense. versus an automatic suspension of your driving privileges for 2 years, and you have no recourse to get them back. But that's Colorado specific. That's not other states. So if you're in other states, either reach out to an attorney or really do your research on whether your state has a similar provision. Because if it's an automatic suspension, it's almost always better to fight it out in court.
Yeah, that's good to know. Really good to know, especially us here in Colorado. So I know we spoke a little bit about this, but what happens in states that do allow cannabis in use in terms of workplace drug testing? How does insurance come into place?
Yeah. So it used to be back in the day, most insurance companies required businesses to drug test for marijuana. That's changing, especially in legal states, but it's still the kind of the norm for heavy industry, automotive, automotive industry, public safety, government. So I would say that insurance isn't necessarily the biggest issue now. Now you're dealing with more workplace attitudes. So, if you have a boss that is really against marijuana, they'll probably drug test for marijuana because they don't want people using marijuana coming to their workplace and potentially, stoned or high or whatever they feel that employee would do. And that is still legal. People can still choose who they want to hire. They just can't discriminate based on protected classes. Again, there would potentially be an argument that they're discriminating against a medical marijuana patient, but because it's not federal, it's really not, federally legal, it's really not clear that you could win that case. But it is an interesting issue to bring up is, what other jobs can essentially say you're taking this medication, oh, you're not allowed to work here. Like that's very rare against ADA in most cases. There might be some jobs that have a higher level, like aviation, if you're a pilot or air traffic controller or in a heavy industry, at that point there's extra regulations that they can put on you to make sure that you're safe. And at that point they could probably say, well, if you're taking, just like if you were taking opiates, we wouldn't allow you to work on, as an air traffic controller, just because you're taking marijuana, we're not going to allow that. But if it's a general job that isn't, a high risk industry and they're just discriminating against you based on the medicine you choose to use and that works for you, I think there's a pretty good claim that that's discrimination based on medical disability. But again, this is all kind of new, and it needs to be, in these cases, need to be brought. And really, what would be better than these cases being brought is federal legalization of cannabis nationwide, and then allow states to regulate, just kind of like they did with hemp. It would be helpful if they had better nationwide standards. But at the same time, we've essentially allowed all 50 states to regulate alcohol since Prohibition, and it's worked out, fairly well. So I'm a proponent of federalism, definitely. So either cases are going to have to be brought to essentially strengthen medical patients' arguments that they're still covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and discrimination against a medical marijuana patient is illegal under federal law, or federal law needs to be changed.
Yeah. How do you suggest we do that as a community? I know it's an election year. How do you think we can bring about that change or pressure our government to do that?
So the biggest impact that I see on people and changing their minds and changing their attitudes toward cannabis is when they are told stories or know somebody that has been through a chronic illness, a really severe chronic illness, and they were on, crazy amounts of pharmaceuticals, and all of a sudden they started using cannabis because the pharmaceuticals weren't working and their life changed around. There are so many stories like that out there. And the more we can promote those stories that cannabis is a medicine, and it doesn't have to be used by everybody. It probably shouldn't be used by everybody, but it is a medicine, and it does have therapeutic value, and it does help people regain functionality, regain happiness, regain their life, get them off of drugs like opiates, which have massive overdose potential, massive depression potential. So getting involved is sharing your stories, calling your congressman, getting involved at the state level, trying to say, hey, we need medical marijuana in the state if you don't have it in that state yet. Hey, why are you forcing all of our medical marijuana patients to move to other states? I mean, Colorado has tens of thousands of medical refugees from all over the country living here because we were one of the first medical marijuana states in the country. And desperate people had no other options, so they moved all the way across the country to Colorado and set up home. And in a lot of cases, they are living in RVs because their medication is expensive and they can't afford typical rent. And not only that, they have a child or a family member with a severe condition. And it's not like these people stop going to the doctor. They're still going to the doctor. They still need medical services. They still rack up medical bills. So it's just really promoting those stories of one, the good that cannabis can do for people and getting them off of opiates and solving major medical issues. We see these articles and studies all the time, but at the same time showing how negative the continued illegality of cannabis is to not only patients, but it's now it's clearly a criminal justice issue, as we've seen through the Black Lives Matter movement. We're seeing more and more cases and more data come out that shows just how big the discrepancy is between enforcement of cannabis policy on the Black and people of color community versus the white community. So it's really a big issue from several different lenses: social justice, medical, and then just basic human rights. And do we want our police to be jailing, so many people for possession of a plant that they're trying to use to help cure or treat a condition that they have through usually no fault of their own? So getting involved is really sharing stories. If it's your own story, really sharing your own story. I know that's a lot of times uncomfortable, but the more people hear about these benefits and the more people hear about how hard it is to move across the country, uproot your whole life, not be able to visit your family members for fear of arrest, I think that compassion can really shine through. And we've seen in Colorado, it's kind of a bipartisan issue now. Medical marijuana is really a bipartisan issue. You don't have even a lot of Republicans in the state house arguing against medical marijuana anymore. It's a given. They've all seen how many people it's helped. So if you're in a state that still doesn't have a program, start finding those cases and start showing up at the Capitol and lobbying and getting in front of your state reps and saying, look, this saved my life, or this saved my child's life, or this saved my friend's life. Because that's how it progressed up to this point. And I think that's how it's going to continue to progress.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We do have a platform for anybody who wants to share their story on our website. I think that's super important. And I know you touched bases on how law is enforced one way with a certain community like the poor and an entirely different way with another community. And I know you mentioned a little bit about that. Could you provide a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I mean, there's essentially two issues going on. When you have systemic racism, in that poorer communities and communities of color are much more heavily policed than affluent communities and predominantly white communities. So that's systemic racism. But you also have the reality that people with not a lot of resources can't hire lawyers to defend them. So they're easy targets. And in a justice system where you have multiple appeals and lawyers can delay proceedings for a really long time and drag things out and bring up technicalities to essentially ruin your case, it's a lot easier to go after somebody who's poor, who will get appointed a public defender who has very little time to go through that case and really dig in and try to find all of the issues with that case, than it is to go after somebody who's rich and can lawyer up and drag the case through court for a year or 2 years, then appeal, and make an extremely expensive process. So I think one, it's a systemic racism issue, and two, it's a budget issue, and it's a low-hanging fruit issue. And they just feel that it's easier to put away people that don't have resources because they can't afford lawyers. And it's a shame. It's, the American justice system needs reform, clearly. Public defenders need more than 15 minutes per case, to spend on each case in order to really, provide an adequate defense. And that's just not going on right now because we underfund our public defenders and we over police and over arrest. And we have the largest prison population. I think we said we're 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. So the American justice system needs reform, and I'm really happy to see the start of it with Black Lives Matter. And Colorado passed a bill 270, or I think it was Bill 217. That's a police reform bill that requires police to report essentially anytime they stop somebody. They have to report why, the probable cause, demographics, information, whether what the result of the stop was, whether it was arrest, a detention, or they let them go, if they touched their gun, if they touched their taser, if they pulled their gun. And then it also removed qualified immunity so that officers are now personally liable for up to $25,000 if they have a wrongful death suit or any other wrongful suit against them, or any other tort suit against them. So Colorado, to my knowledge, is the only state that's passed a law like that so far. So Colorado's really been a leader here. But it needs to go further, and it needs to go beyond police reform. I think it really needs to go into equity in the courtroom, because right now there's a big difference between having a paid lawyer who's going through your files, who's trying to find each technicality that can get you off possible, versus a public defender that has 15 minutes to provide you defense. And because our caseload's so big, that's the reality of their job. So we definitely need some reforms. And I really think that both of those issues play into why there's a disparity about how laws are enforced.
Thank you so much for that and shedding light. I know there's a lot of people in our community that think, that we moved so far into how everything's been legalized, CBD being able to be purchased online, but now we're kind of seeing the true things that are happening. The fact that it's not truly legal, and there's a lot of gray area, and there's a lot of inequality going on in a human's right issue. So thank you so much, Alex, for providing clarity on cannabis and laws, and for your time today. If anyone wants more information or wants to connect with Alex specifically, feel free to hit the link on our comments below. You do provide personal, is it online consultations right now with the whole COVID?
Yeah, so if you go to my website and email me or reach out to me through that site, I'm happy to discuss any one-on-one issues, any state-specific issues with you. One issue I will say is I'm a Colorado licensed attorney, so really you'll need to have a connection to the state of Colorado for me to take anybody on as a client. But I'm happy to provide referrals or assistance in any way that I can to the medical community, because it is very complicated. These issues are still affecting people on a daily basis negatively, and we really need to continue to push for reform, because we're still at the starting line here, and I really believe that this fight isn't over until the social equity and social justice part is solved, and we see mass expungement of past marijuana convictions, as well as programs to get minorities, and minority-owned businesses licenses, because currently most of the business in the cannabis space is still, businesses in the cannabis space are still owned majority by white men. We need to see social justice, and we need to see initiatives to allow the people who were affected the most by the drug war to now profit or benefit from it in whatever way that they can. So thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've learned so much, and I hope our community members have also learned so much more. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them on the comments below. Thanks again, Alex, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too.